The auto industry was very focused on learning from the Japanese, understanding Japanese management, and Toyota stuck out as the best automaker and was the most intensely benchmarked within the auto industry. And I was involved in a study that was comparing the US and Japan auto industry. And I got to know people at Toyota and then continued to study them in more depth. Originally, I was actually focused on product development and supply chain management. And then later, I learned about the Toyota production system and began to consult, for example, to Ford when they were introducing their version, which was the Ford production system. Then continued to research lean product development and had a number of students do dissertations. And that led to several books, one called The Toyota Product Development System, which is less well known than the Toyota Way, and have since published in the that led then to the Toyota Way, which was kind of a general umbrella management system. As I learned from Toyota, the Toyota production system, the book, The Machine That Changed the World, had come out and introduced the term lean manufacturing. And lean kind of took on a life of its own. And what I was saying was that a lot of the basic philosophy and thinking about the Toyota production system was getting lost as it was being translated into Western management companies. And it was becoming more of a technical toolkit that was administered in a top down way by experts in lean rather than a way of engaging people in the process to continuously improve their own process. So starting out with the lean community may have a problem because that's been going on now for several decades. And I think that there's less focus on the Japanese as a model, and lean is becoming a little less popular. Traditionally, when management got more and more into lean and it got the attention of the C-suite, they were interested in results, and the results were mostly in the form of measurable cost savings. So you'd see a lot of lean programs that would lead to auditing, and the audits were done to turn whatever transformation was made into dollars and cents, into savings. And the approach was to hire the outside lean experts, ask the lean experts to give you a proposal that shows over some period of time how much money they're going to save as compared to what it's going to cost to hire them. And that what the lean expert could do, and to do this very rapidly because they had to meet these cost targets, was to train up people in a classroom, maybe 2 days, 3 days, there might be a simulation involved, and then lead events. So the term Kaizen event refers to usually a 5-day event where you start the week by doing some training and you define a problem area and you figure out what the waste is and try to measure that in terms of the dollars and cents, including people. And then you make a bunch of changes very quickly during the week. And then on Friday, you report out what you've accomplished and what results you've got. And that's very popular because you can measure the cost of the event and you can measure the gains from the event. In the meantime, so this was generally led by internal people who were taught by the external people. So it became experts teaching internal experts, but it was not managers. It was not people responsible for daily results of cost, quality, making the product. And lean tools were viewed as something that you introduce like you would a hammer. You hammer a nail in and it sticks in the wall. You take a Kanban system and you lean out inventory. So you're leaning out the processes using the tools. Not everybody did this, and this is probably oversimplified, but this happened quite often. So these days, if you talk to, say, a vice president of continuous improvement who's really introducing lean, they're going to have a broader view beyond just lean tools and eliminating waste. And you see a number of books up here, mine, the second edition of the Toyota Way, that very much emphasizes long-term systems thinking and lean as creating a social and technical system. So people and technology working together to achieve certain goals. The book Lead with Respect by Michael Ballet and his father Freddie is a novel about lean practice that talks about introducing lean with respect for the people who are doing the work. And Katie Anderson worked with Mr. Yoshina, who was one of the early people that introduced lean or the chartered production system in America, and is very people oriented. He was the head of human resources, and she talks about leadership and how Yoshina was just very focused not on lean tools, but on developing a certain type of leader. So, in a nutshell, you could say the definition has grown to encompass creating leaders who are systems thinkers who are trying to create a sustainable, successful enterprise that delivers value to customers. So here's the problem, that lean's original focus was on eliminating waste and cost reduction, which got widespread interest. But as the definition has expanded, far fewer companies are interested or willing or able to adopt this form of lean. So having a consultant come in, run an event, fix a bunch of stuff, leave, and then you try to keep going what they fixed, and it costs you less than you saved, that's fairly easy to buy. Buying a trading program where they create a 3-day trading course that people just cycle through it, and then senior management says, these are now the results I expect from you, that's relatively easy to implement. But developing people, changing people's way of thinking is a big challenge. It takes time, it takes patience, and it's not even clear exactly what you should do. So what you see here is that the number of companies adopting lean in this way, at least, may actually be shrinking as we move toward long-term systems thinking as a focus, as opposed to implementing tools to take out waste. Now, it may be that the number of companies are doing some version of lean that's more tools-based, more traditional. Maybe that hasn't changed very much. So there is an elegant way out of this dilemma, which is instead of trying to copy and implement a complex lean system, and I have my version of lean with 14 principles and 4 Ps and philosophy and process, people, and problem solving, is pretty complicated. And it took Toyota decades to develop their culture and their management system to the point where it just seems natural to them. So another thing you can do is keep doing what you're doing. For example, you can do, if you're doing A3 reports or you're running these Kaizen workshops or you're introducing lean tools, but add over time in parallel the practice of scientific thinking, and then grow organically from there as determined by your context. So in the second edition of the Toto, originally in the Toto way, I had a pyramid, and the foundation was thinking long-term philosophy. And then you introduce lean processes like standardized work and pull systems and leveling the schedule and visual management. And then you develop people in problem solving to continually improve. So that was the pyramid. And the reason I set it up that way is because the philosophy is the foundation, a foundational way of thinking about your purpose as an enterprise. And then the processes are things you can implement. So that's tangible in a manufacturing context. It's physical, you could see it. And really the way Toyota develops people to look to problem solve is by working on the process. So they don't really believe in the abstract, just telling people things or using classroom simulations to convey abstract concepts. They want you to go to what they call the Gemba, where the work is, and actually solve a problem and achieve a goal. And in the process of doing that, the manager or whoever's teaching you, the mentor, has an opportunity to give you feedback and coach you. So just like if you were to say, send your kid to a soccer camp You wouldn't be very happy if in the whole camp they never touched a soccer ball. And a good soccer instructor is going to have one ball for each kid and will be touching the ball almost immediately. They're learning by doing. So anyway, as I learned more about from Mike Rother and this idea of kata, which is a way of practicing to develop scientific thinking, I came to realize that scientific thinking is actually in the center of the 4P model. So I reformulated this as puzzle pieces with scientific thinking as the center. So for example, long-term systems thinking is actually a very high-level advanced form of scientific thinking, recognizing this is a system, the parts interact. There's two-way and three-way and more interactions. There's lots of variables involved that are dynamic and changing, and also recognizing that simply introducing individual tools is not going to build the total production system, a system. Understanding that is then setting the stage for introducing continuous improvement scientifically. And the process that we often think of as the independent variable, we introduce Kanban, we get inventory reduction, we introduce standardized work, we get productivity. Process is actually more like a dependent variable. It's something we're trying to achieve. So we're trying to achieve pull and flow of material or information through the process to the customer without the interruption of waste. We're trying to achieve a consistent way of doing a task. And then there's tools like standardized worksheets or Kanban that might be helpful, but we don't really know in advance whether they're the right tools for the problems that we face, the context we face. And then people need to be trained to think scientifically and to approach problem solving scientifically, moving toward their targets, moving toward their vision, their desired future. So practicing scientific thinking, the purpose is to grow your lean system as opposed to implement fixed tools and solutions that we assume up front will work the way we expect them to work. It's a central enabling element in lean. It can be practiced with benefit across all sorts of organizations, even at your home, even if you want your children are sort of trying to learn math or trying to get a good grade on their tests, you could use a scientific thinking approach to help them achieve that goal. And we believe that making practice of scientific thinking a central element of lean or agile efforts helps you grow into the kind of organization culture you want. And it's more of an evolutionary process than a technical process of implementing tools. So the basic model of that Mike Rother introduced was he called the improvement kata. And it came from observing many Toyota sensei mentors. Sensei is the Japanese word for a mentor or coach, and observing many of them. And what he saw is that the mentor, number one, always issued a challenge to the student. And the challenge was not small, it was big. So it might be, we want 2 times the productivity. It might be that our equipment runs correctly about 60% of the time, and the goal is for it to run effectively 85% of the time. It might be that we have 5% defects and we want to get to 0.3% defects. So it's a big challenge and it's measurable and it's concrete. So they would say to the student, this is where you are. This is where I'd like you to get to. The student would have no idea how they could possibly achieve that. And the student would then wait for the solutions, but the coach would not give them any solutions at all, but rather say, so get started. What should I do? Well, maybe you should understand right now in your current situation where there are opportunities for you to get started. And the student would go and start collecting data and watching and show it to the leader, and the leader would give them feedback of, go look. I don't just want numbers, go look. And then they would get some understanding of the current condition. And they say, I think that these are 3 major problem areas. And then the coach would say, good, pick one and get started. What's your goal for this one area? So what they were doing, what the student was doing was breaking down the problem into a few pieces that they thought might make an impact and move them in the direction of their target. And then for those pieces, they were expected to set a target and then start experimenting. And what the mentor wanted them to do was to think of their ideas not as a solution they're confident will work, but rather like a hypothesis that they're going to test. I have this idea and I think it might work. Good, try it. And then tell me what you learn. So for each experiment, the mentor wanted to know what they learned, what the reflection was. So the overall model is that as a challenge, current condition, and then experiment. And each experiment follows what they call a lean plan, do, check, act, PDCA, which is what's the idea you're going to test? What do you expect will happen? What happened now that you've done it? And what did you learn? And then it's repeated and repeated. The idea of breaking down a problem into smaller pieces, I think, is at the core of Agile. And I've done a lot of studying of Menlo innovations in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I also wrote about it in the Total Way. And they create story cards, and each story card is what they want a feature to do. And then they expect the programmer to figure out how to achieve what the customer wants based on experimenting with code. And then once they finished one story card, then they move to the next story card and the next story card. And they're getting frequent feedback, daily feedback, weekly feedback from customers, and correcting and learning and correcting and learning, and then building up the software program. So continuous improvement in a Toyota factory is not all that different from that. So I'll stop and turn it over to
Yeah.
you.
Hey, Jeff, yeah, I would love to just build on what you just said in terms of agility and also have a few slides trying to use scientific thinking in the world of agility. How can we improve agility? And what's interesting, when I was out in Ann Arbor visiting you back in September with Mike and Rich Sheridan from Menlo, what was very interesting is when we drew on the whiteboard the journey of agility. And I just want to remind everyone, we've been doing this since 2001 when the Agile Manifesto was written. And in the beginning of the early years, we were really focused on creating team agility. That was really the main focus, bringing an Agile process into a team. But then what happened was after that was that we were focusing more on Agile transformations leading to business agility where we are. But 2012, 13, that was really the moment where Agile transformations really took off. And when we're reflecting on the success of Agile transformations. And then maybe that is similar to what you described before in lean transformations. What we're noticing is that 75%, and I'm using this quote quite a bit, is based on a report by McKinsey, and Agile Alliance has released that in 22, that 75% of these Agile transformations actually failed. That is a poor track record. And that was also a reminder for us to really think about why are we failing with these Agile transformations. And roughly 50% state that cultural change is the main reason. Now, when we're looking at scientific thinking, what you just mentioned in the lean manufacturing world, it is pretty much the same in the Agile communities. Like, what do people do on a day-to-day basis? How do they operate? And cultural change is really the sum of the individual behavior. So how do we change these kind of behaviors? And what we've noticed is in surveys and in these reports is that we see certain language in organizations. I say we're using Scrum or we're using SAFe, like collectively across the board. There's this sense of let's all do the same thing. Let's all use the same tools. Let's all use the same and share the same process. Some people refer to it that they have already completed an agile transformation, that it's behind them rather than ahead of them, or that they are working within an agile transformation. We also see waterfall behavior of waves of training and then coaching and then something else. We see teams that are making references to other processes, such as the very popular Spotify model, for example, even though Spotify model does not exist necessarily within Spotify. It's just a name that was extracted out of the organization. So when we're looking at all of those things, how can we expect an agile culture to emerge if the transformational process really doesn't have the attributes agility. And that's really where the Agile Kata really began. And when I stumbled across Mike Rother's work in 2009, his Toyota Kata book, the neurological pathways, really, that is one of the things that really stood out if you're thinking about it, right? So I live in bear country here near New York. There's bears walking around, and it's very interesting. Is like if you would ask, like, you're approaching a bear, and a typical instinct is very often you would be running or climbing on a tree. And it's very interesting that we're being reminded not to do that. We will be outrun and we will not have a chance if we're climbing on a tree. But these are neurological pathways, things we do. For example, another one is like an airplane situation. We're always being reminded when we go on a plane to first put the oxygen mask on ourselves before we help others. And that is something that has to be reiterated, but we haven't really practiced it, right? So that is a key piece. So we're being constantly reminded. So these are behavioral changes we're going through. And that's very similar to an agile way of working. If you're thinking about you're doing something in a very specific way within a team, or as an individual, or as a team collectively, and to change that kind of behavior and how to do that. And that was the intriguing part of Kata and scientific thinking. So for me, the Agile Kata, because there is a word agile in it, right, is the universal pattern for continuous improvement of agility. So we're focusing, really trying to use what Jeff said in a knowledge work way, but also to increase agility within an organization or within a team, changing culture. So that was really the starting point in 2009, the book by Mike Rother, Toyota Kata. There was also a book that came shortly after. It's the Phoenix Project. I don't know how many of you guys have read or listened to the Phoenix Project. There's also a segment about Kata. So a very popular book, a very best-selling book in our Agile bookshelf. The Phoenix Project also makes references to Kata. So the concept is obviously not new. It's something that was extracted from Toyota, but can be applied in many ways. And we were writing already about this in earlier days. In 2018, Melissa Perry released the book, The Build Trap. And even in this book also was a reference of using Kata for product development, right? So how do we use within agile product development, the Kata? Just yesterday, very timely, I released a podcast with her, where we're actually exploring in more depth and very focused on how Kata could help you close that build trap. So if you want to listen to that on Agile FM, I'll invite you to do that. But it's an interesting reference she made. She also keynoted the Agile 2022 in Nashville. And that was interesting because that really put Kata also on the map of the Agile Alliance, which has since then very much supportive of the idea and is really helping to unlock potential here. And then obviously brought me to this book and Jeff's second edition, the Toyota Way, what you were just talking about. So the addition to the 4Ps and the Kata as a central point. Super quick, what Jeff just mentioned before, how does this all look like? There are basic routines, and that is the pattern. And obviously we could go in much more depth in this, but the stepping sequence is that we would be first looking at a challenge. And as Jeff said, that could be a very big challenge, purposely a big challenge. And it's not something that can be planned for, and we know exactly the path of how we're going to get to that. An interesting piece of Kata thinking in scientific thinking in general is to step back and say, what is actually my current condition? Where am I today? And that's sometimes against human nature, or what we would be doing in terms of our neurological pathways is you just go ahead and do it. No, the scientific thinking reminds us to step back and first look at where we are before we make a tiny step forward and look at our target condition, a small step that gets us towards the direction we have in mind. But this is just a small step forward. For agile folks, when you look at this, very natural way of thinking, but it's not necessarily something we would be referring to as a sprint, for example, in Scrum. It's very different. It's a target condition rather than a sprint goal. And then you see this iterating loop here on step 4, the experimentation piece. That's the EDCA cycles, where we go through the experiments and perform these cycles. And you can see it's a bumpy road sometimes, or most frequently. So that's not going to be a straight line. And by repeating these steps 2, 3, and 4, we're getting closer and closer to our challenge. Now, if we're using this kind of scientific thinking as a core and surrounding this with certain elements that increase agility, we can now use scientific thinking, by incorporating ideas. And you just see some visuals here just to give you some ideas on liberating structures, facilitation techniques, agile coaching, leadership, value-driven metrics. There is unfix, for example, as a pattern that could work very close with that. We could work with evidence-based management, for example, to measure the progress we make and utilize value metrics. So all of those things we would love to see surround the scientific thinking. And that's what we're referring to as Agile Kata. So we promote the idea, and we see in case studies, we're hearing back now from communities, a very diverse set of what people are doing with Agile Kata. So for example, Agile Kata could be the pattern for steering, guiding an agile transformation. It could be a tool, a pattern for organizations trying to achieve a higher degree of business agility, product development, just like what Melissa Perry was mentioning, also a great source for Kata and introducing Kata into a team. Very interesting what you just mentioned with Jeff, with the Menlo innovation is using Kata and scientific thinking as a team process, right? As a replacement of what's currently being done. And the mindset of scientific thinking and what it creates responds very well to the 12 principles of the manifesto. So here, that's a great success story there too. But some teams use it also to introduce Kata for working through their retrospective ideas as well, coming out of a sprint. So there's also huge potential there to remove something which we refer to it as zombie scrum, for example, where teams go through a specific notion, robotic behavior of doing the same things over and over again. And the Kata can send that impulse of change. So that's where we are with our Agile Kata. We want to build a bridge between lean manufacturing, what lean mindset, the pop and tick. Somebody had a question about that before, which I had responded to in the Q&A section there. Somebody asked about is how does lean translate to knowledge work, if I understood the question right. The pop and ticks have been very instrumental there in the early days of taking a lean mindset to software development. But I think the Agile Kata or scientific thinking in general can be a great source for helping us in the Agile community to bring more success to transformation, create that business agility. That's a big buzzword right now. And we hope that Kata can stimulate that, but also as an alternative for teams to think about goals and challenges differently rather than going through a sprint-based approach. So the huge opportunities here for us. So just to summarize these things, it supports an agile mindset. We work in very small steps. Those are not sprints. We innovate, we experiment, we have continuous improvement. We've utilized coaching, however, on a team level rather than individual. We're introducing fail fast and often and system thinking as part of that. I hope you got a little bit of a feeling of how what Jeff was talking about and on Toyota Way and the second edition, and what kind of key element Kata is for that, but also how we utilize it possibly for within the Agile community. Thank you so much. And Jeff, thanks for
Thanks for having me, Joe. Take care then.
take care.